province further to the west, your own home turf of British Columbia, it's very interesting to me to see the unity of the parties of the right. There is now one merged party of the right there, which I think is always a good step forward to winning government. John Rustad, who is a pretty independent-minded, freedom-oriented guy, I think. You would tell me just before we went turned on the cameras that there's some shyness out there about this policy. Now, I understand BC and Vancouver in particular is progressive on social matters, but I have to believe that for the reasons you and I just talked about, and for other reasons, cultural reasons, like a very interesting cultural mix in BC, I would think that a Danielle Smith style, nuanced, balanced, loving approach would be enormously popular, not just by straight folks, but by almost everyone other than professional activists. Like I just in my bones feel that that would be a winner in BC. Tell me the status of the BC Conservative Party when it comes to this issue.
Sure. So I'm a BC boy. I've lived here my whole life. 45 of my 48 years I've been here. And I've had almost the vast majority of my conversations I've had have been out on the streets of Vancouver or in Victoria or wherever. And I get more than 90% support from the population. When I go out on the street now, it's constant high fives, thank yous, people thanking me from their car. This is wildly popular. My message that children cannot consent to puberty blockers. There's only a few hundred people who are really these outlandish and very loud activists who make great noise. And of course, all the leftist media goes along with them. But we don't need to worry about them. And the Conservative Party of British Columbia previously has stated that they wanted to get gender ideology out of schools. They have stated somewhat timidly that they want to stop this child abuse, this medical malpractice of blocking the development of perfectly healthy children. But they've gone silent about it lately, and that's been very concerning to me. And it's concerning because right now in the polls, they're running at about 50-50. The popular vote right now, according to the polls, is 50-50. And we go to the polls in 15 days. We have an election in 15 days. And if the popular vote remains at 50-50, the Conservatives lose because they win by large margins out in the rural areas. But their vote isn't as efficient because in these inner city areas where there are many more ridings, they'll end up losing by smaller margins. So what they need to do in the final 2 weeks is get these swing voters. Yeah. And in BC elections, I've paid attention to this my whole life. It's all about the last 2 weeks of the political campaign. They need to be strong on this issue. They need to be strong for parental rights because all of these immigrant communities, all of these swing voters, they are not okay with gender ideology. The immigrant communities the most are against it. Yeah. This is primarily pushed by white progressives, especially young females. And the people who are into this ideology, they're not going to get their vote anyway. They're going to vote NDP. But there are so many swing voters up for grabs. And even if you want to get more enthusiasm from the Conservatives to get more of that vote out, you need to be strong on this issue, not shy away from it. Yeah. So hopefully they get strong on this because they've gone quiet lately. And I had a couple posts up today on my X account. And a member of their campaign has actually just reached out to me. So I'm going to be talking with him right after this phone call.
Well, I think what you just said to me was quite persuasive. I should tell you, a few years ago, Ontario had a bit of a debate about this. They talked about the 6 genders that were put in the curriculum. And I would be in cabs or Ubers talking on my phones about this with whoever, our team. And every single time, as soon as I was off my phone call, the taxi driver would say, "Excuse me, can I ask you about that?" Like I normally leave the taxi drivers alone and vice versa. But the reason I tell you that is I think people come from other countries to Canada and they're blown away by the freedom and they love the prosperity and they're excited about the new country. And there's many things that foreign people are delighted to find in Canada that they didn't find at home. But I find that foreign people, when they come to Canada to become Canadians, one of the things that scares them is they think that on matters of sexuality and certain other matters, drugs I think would be another one, is that we've gone so far down the progressive road that it's now libertinism. In BC, I think the national approach to quote safe supply drugs is something else that terrifies immigrant newcomers, and it's one of the things that make them think, well, maybe I shouldn't have come to Canada because what are my kids going to be on drugs, or are they going to be recruited in one of these gay straight alliances and told things contrary to our family values? So I think especially in places in BC where with a lot of Chinese or Sikh or other immigrant communities, this would be more important than a tax issue. This would be more important than a zoning issue, than a garbage collection issue. This would go straight to their deepest fear about the one thing they're worried about in Canada, which is losing their culture and their values about family. Like, I think this is a terrifying thing for ethnic minorities. And now, listen, I say that as a fourth-generation Canadian, so maybe I'm sounding a little bit like an anthropologist trying to study new Canadians, but I think they're terrified. What do you think?
There's one continuous protest that's been going on for almost a year now out in Abbotsford, British Columbia, by the Sikh community, and it's been a protest against gender ideology in schools. The biggest protest that we had during the million-person march, it was called last year, was in Surrey, British Columbia, and it was by the Sikh community. Yeah. They had 3,000 people shut down King George Highway, the major thoroughfare through Surrey, British Columbia. The Muslim community is all against this, yeah. Every single one of them. The Asian community is not okay with it. So I was just getting in my Uber. I got back from Europe 2 days ago, and as I was getting my Uber at Vancouver Airport, a man came and stopped me, and he said, "Hey, are you that Billboard guy?" And yes, it's me. I asked where he was from. I meant to ask, whereabouts in Vancouver you're from. He said, "I'm from Afghanistan." But now he lives in Vancouver. But of course, he's also in favor of what I'm doing, which is trying to stop this terrible ideology teaching children that they're born wrong. We don't have to come at this from a complaining standpoint. Yeah. Too many people do that. Movements are much more powerful when you offer positivity and hope. And the positive message is that our children are beautiful just as they are. No drugs or scalpels needed. And everyone understands that. And there's no right or wrong way to be a girl or a boy. If you're a little different, that's okay. You be you. But let's not stop your physical development, and let's not cut off body parts of children. Let's put a stop to this insane child abuse, which starts by getting gender ideology out of schools.
Yeah. And I really liked the order of how Danielle Smith went through it. I like the fact that she ended with something that sports. Because that's an easy way for, and again, there's a ton of mums out there, mums and especially, but dads too, whose daughters are in sports. And I keep telling folks, the era of women's sports is quite recent. It wasn't even 100 years ago where women were not allowed to participate in many sports. There's that famous photograph of a woman trying to run in the Boston Marathon. I don't know if you remember that photo, Chris, and officials breaking in to literally grab her and pull her out. It has, and we sort of had the golden age of girls in sport. And now women's sports is the first target. It's being destroyed by entryists saying, "Oh no, I'm a girl," and everyone's too afraid to say something because they'll be condemned, they'll be canceled, they'll be called a bigot. But they don't want to get hurt, and they don't want to play an unfair game. So I think that the way Danielle Smith is approaching it is so balanced and so reasonable. I hope she can withstand the hurricane that's coming at her, because as you say, I think it's just an elite group of mainly progressive white women, so to speak. I've got nothing against them, but that's just who it is. It's a small clique. I don't think it represents the majority of Canadians of any demographic.
It doesn't at all. These are just, very angry and loud activists, and they've learned through time that the louder they are and the angrier they are, that they get results. So honestly, it's just kind of acting like an intemperate child and throwing a temper tantrum, and we need to ignore them. So just ignore them, because you have wide support from the whole population, especially on the sports issue. This is so simple. Sometimes with the child transition issue, it requires a bit more of a conversation to explain what's going on. Sports issue is so easy. We shouldn't have men and women's sports. Everyone gets it.